Hi. Um, excuse the mess. I'm in a dorm. I'm no longer in my house. I'm in university again. I'm doing my master's now, so it's just messy here.
Chad forgives
Um,
you.
that's wonderful. Thank you, Chat. Let me see. If I would have gotten a haircut if you told me like a day before. Fuck.
Your hair
Can't.
looks like you just got a haircut. I think you're fine. At least I
Sweet.
wouldn't worry. I wouldn't worry too much.
All right. All right. Let me
Yeah.
share my screen.
Yeah. Hit me up. I am. I am very sleepy, and by sleepy I mean inured with the impending death of liberalism in the West. So, let's let's not engage with the formalities too much. I want to know whether or not Putin is dead. Has that happened yet? Did we win?
I mean, if the Daily Mail report back in June is correct, he has been replaced by a body double. So we'll find out. By the way, yeah, I will. I wanted to add in my summary that a little bit of information on like how to better understand and avoid bad information, because if anything, this war has shown that in the modern day, disinfo just and misinformation just spreads like wildfire, especially with big events. All right. So I thought that since we had done like a full summary last time of how the war in Ukraine had kind of developed up to now, I thought that I would jump into the big issues that would like to discuss, and I thought that it would be nice to just like get rid of some myths. I want to discuss Russian mobilization, because there was a lot of memes around that, the evacuation of Kherson, and the recent missile strikes, right? I think that's the big topics of the day, if I'm not mistaken, unless you have anything else in mind.
No, that sounds about right. Hit me up. I know there were recently some missile strikes and some
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
egregious war criming.
Yes, of course. All right. So, first of all, Russian mobilization. Do you remember when the mobilization started, when we got like a bunch of videos of like rusty guns and 67-year-old people like with I don't know, with like dislocated knees getting mobilized in the Russian military?
I do.
Yeah. So here's the thing. How do we explain these stories, and how do they happen, right? So Russia is very big and very corrupt. So this means that when you have a mobilization system that is very old, comes back from the Soviet times, there's a bunch of local officials who are cartoonishly corrupt. There's stockpiles and depots that haven't been checked. So what happened is, in different regions, mobilization was a completely different experience for many people. And of course, the Russians are still facing problems with that. So, for example, early in the war, that case with the older people getting mobilized, apparently some local mobilization officers in, I don't know where it was, probably the Russian Far East. I think it was probably Yakutia or something like that. They all just kind of went out in neighborhoods and just plucked every guy they could find just so they could fill in the quota. So they completely ignored the order to collect reservists, stuff like that. So reservists, by the way, are soldiers who have already served in the military, so they have prior service experience. And Russia has a pretty big pool of these reservists, so it wouldn't make sense to just grab some like random 70-year-old man off the street. You can just grab reservists, and then if you want to grab older people, they're going to be tank drivers. They're going to be working in maintenance. They're going to be working in the rear. So that's how usually mobilization should work. Now, something on the Soviet mobilization scheme. Now, Russia and the Soviet Union are no longer the same country. Russia is significantly weaker and smaller than the Soviet Union was. And back in the day, the Soviet Union had a robust system of half half full or skeleton divisions, which had their training and command personnel and vehicles there. And in case of war, they would rapidly be infused with manpower, and also they would be this manpower would be trained and sent to the front, so that the Soviet Union could bring 2-3 million men just very, very rapidly. And Russia has left this system to rust for many, many years, and now their mobilization machine is basically grinding like a 50-year-old ladder transmission. Um, the whole issue is that when they went into Ukraine, they had major manpower problems that stemmed from the fact that, well, they hadn't mobilized, they only used professional soldiers, and a lot of their units went in without their full complement of manpower, but with their full complement of equipment. Hence why they lost so much equipment, and they were so light on infantry during these earlier stages of the war. Now, they mobilized after this humiliating defeat around Izium and during the Kharkiv offensive, where the Ukrainians blew open the lines over in the north and basically liberated the Kharkiv Oblast. And a lot of this came down to the fact that the Russian line was just very, very thin. So now with mobilization, essentially the Russians seek to solve their manpower problem, right? So they're essentially trying to get fresh manpower, fill out divisions, stop the losses of equipment, not the loss of equipment; those can't stop. Stop the loss of personnel. So, for example, ending contracts. A lot of soldiers that had their contracts expired just left the military. So they're basically trying to stem their manpower losses and basically mobilize the significant pool of manpower that Russia can provide them. Now, while rusty guns and perhaps like rusty equipment, people being given tampons to fill in wounds, uh, or people or mobilized soldiers being dropped off in random places without any shelter, or mobilized soldiers being dropped off right at the front. This stuff, it's inconsistent. Sometimes it will happen. Sometimes it is a fluke. We can't really tell. There isn't enough information. We need to consider that this is a mobilization of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and the Russians might possibly move on to mobilize even more. Their orders are kind of open-ended, and they tend to ignore their own decrees anyway. So they might end up mobilizing maybe up to 1 million soldiers. So now this begs the question, right? Even though there are these inconsistencies, what can we know that are problems that the Russian Federation will face during its mobilization? So first of all, they will definitely face a lack in C2 equipment, so command and control equipment, radios, communications devices, drones, and also medical equipment. This stuff, Russia just doesn't have enough stocks immediately available to just give to 1 million soldiers. Now, logistics, it's a bit of a question mark. So here's the thing: most of these soldiers that will arrive now, these mobilized soldiers, most of them are going to be light infantry, meaning they won't have that much artillery, they won't have that many tanks, and they're going to be used to fill out defensive lines and provide defense in depth. So a lot of the logistics requirements, the heavy logistics requirements, which are for artillery shells, tank shells, fuel, and essentially heavy vehicles, all this stuff is already being kind of handled by the Russian military. So adding a lot of light infantry, it isn't as taxing on the logistical system. And of course, with mobilization, you're going to mobilize logistics personnel, such as engineers, cooks, like all this personnel is going to be mobilized as well. So I don't know if their logistics will suffer as much as we expect, but of course there will be an impact there. Now with the evacuation from Kherson, their logistics have been simplified, at least in the eastern part of the not the eastern, the western part of the front, in the south. So something else, training. So how the Russian military does its trainings, if I'm not mistaken, is that mobilized soldiers are supposed to go to their units and receive training with their units. The thing is, a lot of these units have been sent off to the front, and a lot of the trainers and the people and personnel from training academies have been now at the front dying for like 6 7 months. Meaning that a lot of the training personnel has been depleted, and Russia is kind of scraping the barrel in terms of training personnel and capacity. They have been sending mobilized soldiers to Belarus to train with the Belarusian army. And if you've ever seen how the Belarusian army trains, you will be. It's like I don't know. Have you ever seen like fake martial artists doing stuff like
I
demonstrations?
Yeah, I have, like,
Well,
Steven Seagal type shit.
yeah, it's like the military version of that. So they're training with the Belarusians. They have pulled personnel from higher military academies, which aren't meant to be training reservists. They have pulled they have recalled personnel that had been fired for being incompetent to train personnel. So the training of these reservists is gonna be poor, and it's gonna be of limited capacity, meaning that it will take a lot of time for Russia to deploy these soldiers. Now, a lot of the reports that a lot of mobilized soldiers were reaching the front immediately with almost no training were true. It just wasn't all of them. It was like a smaller amount of these soldiers were sent, especially in the Kharkiv and Luhansk front in the north, in order to plug the gaps created by the Kharkiv offensive that the Ukrainians had done a couple of months ago. So a lot of them were sent there. Another big batch was sent to into Ukraine to train in the rear with some of the units that are rotating there, and to fill out losses in other units. But the vast majority are still training and probably forming new units in Russia. So their timing was, well, good in a sense that they did their mobilization before the mud season, the autumn mud season, meaning that a lot of the front has kind of been frozen solid if we ignore Kherson. And that means there's time until the winter campaigning season for the Russians to deploy that manpower. And what the mobilization means for the Russians, while it is unclear, a lot of people say, "Oh, it's going to destroy the Russian army. Oh, it's going to make them win in Ukraine." I take a kind of a middle position. It's going to be inconsistent. We can't know exactly what the mobilization will do, but I know for sure that things that it will provide is depth of defense in Russian lines, meaning that if the Ukrainians break a line, they will have to fight again for positions that are now now have trenches and are manned behind the initial front of the Russians. So that will make big breakthroughs like we saw in Kharkiv more difficult. uh, yeah, that's the main benefit, and also the fact that they're going to be refitting a lot of units. I mean, they're more than doubling the manpower they have in Ukraine, so that will count for something. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say on mobilization. Is there something to ask
No,
before I
I mean,
move on to?
I'm fully in the classroom right now. I have no right to dictate the course of the lecture. Um, no, that being said, I fully understand stuff like that. I'm curious about the more recent developments. Obviously the Kherson, the reconquering of Kherson, and the missile shelling as well. Mostly because those are the only recent updates that we've had from the war, I think. To those who are just following headlines, which at this point I am for the most part, because I've been very preoccupied with what's going on in America. Those are the two most recent things I can remember happening. I don't know if I can recall anything outside of that. That in the past month or so that's really captured much attention. I mean, I figure this stuff gets pretty like ingrained on the front lines, you know? Like we're in that point now where a long time can pass just holding a line until
Yeah.
you get these brief opportunities to surge forward.
Yeah. Of course, the lines are solidifying, and if you see the Russians are also constructing a bunch of defensive lines with tank traps and hedgehogs, and so are the Ukrainians. So it might the front is solidifying very heavily in the areas where they have stopped moving. But Kherson was a nice exception to that. Now, so what's the deal with Kherson, right? So the front
What
line
is
in
the deal?
Kherson had yeah, the the front line in Kherson had been pretty stable for a very long time. The Russians couldn't move forward, mainly because the Ukrainians had been shelling the crossings in Kherson with HIMARS rockets, and they struck the Antonovsky Bridge, they struck the dam, meaning that the Russians had a really hard time resupplying those soldiers. And then the Ukrainians, essentially, what they had in mind is that they were going to push and attrit the Russian forces that are there and cause them to expend a lot of artillery ammunition, so that they're essentially forced to either cling on to Kherson and until they run out of ammunition and get cornered, or run away. Essentially, this whole position in Kherson was kind of doomed for the Russians. They couldn't really move forward, and they couldn't move back for a lot of political reasons. Now, but the thing is, it wasn't exactly easy for the Ukrainians. It was
Wait,
a very, very bloody front. Yeah.
elaborate on those political reasons. So
So, yeah,
I understand, like, logistically, because Kherson splits the river. I understand that maintaining a presence west of the river, or north of the river here, I guess, is really difficult because you're sort of funneled into very narrow supply lines when it comes to keeping the troops resupplied. You can be pushed against the river. It's difficult to retreat, that kind of stuff. So I logistically I understand. Politically, so you're saying it's just like it's bad optically to have to retreat across the river because that's like a known and well recognized like line of conflict. It looks like more of a retreat if you move across the river.
it's not because of that. It's because the city of Kherson was the capital of the oblast, so it was the capital of the region that Russia had just annexed, and they had put up signs in Kherson saying, "Welcome, Kherson, Russian city, Russian citizens, welcome to the Federation."
Of course.
Uh, Liberated once again, blah 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 blah. So they were forced to abandon basically the state capital of a recently annexed oblast, which means that the Russians are essentially have committed themselves to continue trying to recapture this territory. They were essentially holding the entire region, but now they basically abandoning these territories. It makes it really really hard for them to recapture them. So, and of course, losing the capital is big politically. Now, the reason why this attack here wasn't essentially a Ukrainian push that completely destroyed the Russians, but rather more of a Russian withdrawal, has to do with the nature of the fighting and the terrain here. If you see the terrain around Kherson, you will see that it is just a bunch of small villages, meaning very small, like one street, uh, low-rise wooden buildings, and then it's just open fields, meaning that any advancing army has to deal with very open terrain, with open sight lines, soldiers entrenched in tree lines, hitting advancing tanks with ATGMs. So a lot of Ukrainian attacks here were actually really bloody and contributed to a lot of casualties. But the whole point of these attacks was putting pressure on the Russians, and they did break the line a couple of times. It's just that they never quite managed to do a full breakthrough because the Russians had fortified Kherson and were doubling down on holding it. So they had fortified multiple lines. They had fallback lines. They had actually pretty decent troops here, meaning they had the paratroopers. So the Russians were dedicated in holding on, but the closer the Ukrainians got, even with bloody casualties, the more untenable the crossings became. So essentially, the Russians decided to withdraw. The Ukrainians weren't advancing just yet, but they were building up their forces. So the Russians could only build around 25,000 soldiers here without overstraining their logistics. While the Ukrainians had started amassing troops and they had around 70,000 outside. So essentially, the Ukrainian front was preparing for big pushes, even though casualties could have been pretty horrific for such an attack. So essentially, the Russians decided to withdraw, and what did they do? We got from satellite imagery that they were slowly pulling out all the vehicles they had, heavy weapons, tanks, artillery pieces. They left whatever didn't work or was damaged and destroyed from before. So once they pulled out all of their heavy equipment, they started moving their artillery behind. Then they started moving a lot of the better personnel and started replacing them with mobilized soldiers. And then they announced the fact that they were retreating. And once they announced the fact that they were retreating, they essentially ran for the crossings with all their vehicles and abandoned the front immediately. The Ukrainians were a bit apprehensive in moving forward because the front was extensively mined and was full of traps. So the Ukrainians did not hug them because that would have meant a lot of casualties. And also, there is a benefit to not having boxed them in, because if they had boxed them in, it could have been a lengthy siege of the city of Kherson that could have destroyed the city with urban fighting. So essentially, they got back Kherson with very minimal damage to the city itself, which is really good for the Ukrainians. Now, a lot of people, said that immediately. Oh, the Ukrainians have conducted a major amphibious offensive. They've crossed the river. I'll go into the information diet a bit later, and I will explain why that was a stupid assertion at the time. But in effect, the Russians did successfully retreat. It's probably the best planned operation that I've seen from the Russians during this war, and it was a retreat. So that says a lot, I guess.
Yeah, it happened relatively quickly. It wasn't the same enormous abandonment of materials that
Yeah.
happened in the Kharkiv region. So I good for them, I guess. I hope they continue being good at that.
Yeah, yes, let them continue withdrawing without bitter fighting. That would be nice. But unfortunately, I think now the big the big fighting is still ahead of us. Unfortunately, it's just that now the lines are way more solid and filled out with these opportunities that we saw with Kherson, with Kharkiv. They just aren't there anymore. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the front moves forward. But what did I mention there briefly about the information diet and amphibious operations? So something to keep in mind actually no, I will talk a bit about should I talk a bit about the missile strikes, or do you want me to briefly talk about crossings?
No, I want to hear about the missile strikes. I know
Right,
that
cool.
I think I woke up to seeing Zelensky tweeting about those specifically.
Right. So essentially, the missile strikes, the goal of the Russian missile strikes are not necessarily just blind terror of the population. The main goal is to destroy the Ukrainian electrical grid. And to that end, their missile strikes are effective. The Ukrainian grid has degraded to a great extent, and a lot of cities don't have electricity, which is just terrible considering the civilians in the winter. So why are they doing this, and what do we think about war crimes and ethics? First of all, ethically, like, this whole invasion is completely insane, right? It's completely unethical, and and the missile strikes are unethical as along with them. I mean, I could basically argue that any killing of Ukrainian soldiers, let alone harming civilians, could be unethical. But specifically talking about the legal aspect, is the bombing of the power plants a war crime? Well, there is this principle in effect when we're talking about war crimes, and it is when you do a strike, what is the primary goal of that strike, and is the suffering of civilians a secondary effect, or an unintended, even if predictable, an unintended consequence? So the what the Ukrainian government does claim, and also a lot of Western observers do claim, is that essentially the Russians are doing this missile strike campaign specifically to make the population freeze in the winter, and the population will most definitely freeze in the winter. The use of gasoline will increase rapidly in the civilian population. People will be burning fires to keep warm. It's going to get really bad this winter for Ukrainian civilians. Um, but then the Russians would probably turn around and say that their missile strikes are primarily intended to harm the military infrastructure of Ukraine, meaning that without electricity, the Ukrainian trains cannot run. Essentially, the vast majority of Ukrainian trains are electrified, meaning that they would have to rely on diesel trains for the majority of their transportations from now on, which would harm logistics of the Ukrainian army. Then there's the fact that civilian fuel needs will skyrocket, meaning that the military will have to consider whether or not to provide fuel to the civilians or not. And then there's the fact that underground workshops that repair equipment need electricity. So how do we decipher this whole situation? Well, the United States has a hard time taking a really strong position on this because even if the what about argument with with Iraq a lot of the time that the Russians do, it's really funny because essentially they're saying that they are the United States in the case of Iraq, even though they condemn the Iraq war.
Yeah, it's not
Whatever.
the strongest argument, it's sort
Not
of
the smartest.
responding, "Oh, well, what about the time you raped somebody, huh?"
Yes, like
it's yeah, not a compelling
yeah.
defense.
Uh, Essentially here though, it does work in one sense. The United States did strike a lot of power plants in Iraq that did most definitely not only harm civilians but also harmed the local infrastructure, likely led to some people suffering. The thing is, then America, of course, said that these power plants were part of the military complex, so they say that these aren't war crimes. I could say that either both of them are war crimes or neither of them are war crimes. I'm leaning towards the side of the Russians having double motivations. Sure, they want to hurt the military of Ukraine with these strikes, but also they very much intend to cause harm to the morale of the Ukrainian people and thus cause harm to the civilians. They have stated this multiple times. So I lean towards the end that these are war crimes and that the Iraq defense doesn't count because I would consider those to be war crimes as well. So yeah, whatever. That's my main deal with the missile strikes. Now the another thing, the Russians had expended in that very big missile strike after the Crimean bridge was hit. They launched something like 100 missiles. Um, and now recently they launched 70. uh, the Russians are running out of some types of missiles, specifically their precision guided missiles, those that are more accurate, that have a higher percentage chance of hitting their target. Those are the missiles that they're running low on, like the Iskanders, the Caliber missiles. These missiles they're running low on, and some of their aviation borne missiles are also running low. However, they do have very extensive stockpiles of S-300 missiles. Essentially, these are missiles that belong to the S-300 air defense system, which is very common both in Russia and in Ukraine, in Ukrainian service. And while these are primarily intended to be air defense missiles, very big missiles, uh, they are also pretty decent at their ground attack mode. So they can also be fired to the ground. They have a smaller payload than the very big Iskanders, and they're way less accurate. But Russia likely has tens of thousands of those missiles. So I think the accuracy of their strikes is likely to diminish, but I don't think they're going to run out. And especially they've been using these Iranian drones, the Saheds, and those are very cheap, so they cause a problem. So you don't want to be firing like $500,000 missiles to take down a $20,000 drone. is just not good. So there, I mean, my recommendation, I think a lot of other experts have mentioned this, the Ukrainians need to start using more old school anti-aircraft guns, meaning dual ZSU-23-2s, Shilkas, all those air defense systems that were meant to take helicopters and low-flying jets should likely be used to tackle the light drone threat and the loiter munition threat.
Mhm.
So that's my take
No,
on
I think we
the
talked about this last
subject.
time too. That arsenal of democracy stuff, where it's good to maintain a backlog of like less advanced, maybe like 1980s era weapons, because even if you have the most expensive shit in the world, like a HIMARS can be taken out with like a $12 bomb. I mean anything at the end of the day, like you still want to keep up a numerical advantage. So it's you don't ever want to be like trading incredibly expensive top of the line Western military equipment, like unit for unit, with anything
Yeah,
Russia's supplying.
yeah, exactly. I mean, quantity has a quality of its own when it comes to war. That's probably the one thing I agree with with Stalin. So, hey, I mean, you gotta agree with on one thing, I
Gotta
guess.
hand it to him.
Gotta. Under no circumstances you gotta hand it to anyway.
Except
So,
for, of
yeah,
course.
except for that, he production, sure. Okay. What was I saying? Yeah. Here's the thing. With the U.S. military specializing so heavily on very high quality and very high end systems, there is a problem that has emerged recently when it comes to supplying the Ukrainian military. Uh, and that as the big problem is twofold. First of all, there is the equipment that is very hard for the Ukrainian army to maintain, like tanks, the Abrams tanks. They're very hard to send to Ukraine. So there, thankfully, a lot of Eastern European and some other partners of the United States have a lot of former Soviet infantry fighting vehicles and tanks. Greece is sending around 200 BMPs, which now Germany is going to supply Marder armored fighting vehicles. And then there's also the what I my criticism of the US there is that they're not sending Abrams tanks to replace T-72s and T-80s that are being sent from like countries like Bulgaria, Czechia. They should be the Americans should be basically sending Abrams tanks to every European country that is willing to send all Soviet gear to Ukraine. That should be priority number one. And then there's the problem of artillery ammunition consumption. So here's the thing. America essentially starts every campaign by gaining a domination of the air, absolute air superiority. That's their first priority when fighting any war. So they have impunity to strike with aviation bombs and guided munitions from the air. So the artillery arm of the American army is a bit less impressive. It's also focused a lot on accuracy rather than volume of fire, meaning that American stocks of ammunition are being depleted. I mean, in terms of stocks of 155 millimeter ammunition, which is the new ammunition that the Ukrainians are using for their M777 guns and other Western artillery that has been sent, the Americans, I think, have expended around a sixth of their stockpile supplying Ukraine. Um, which is
Quite a
which
lot,
is
actually.
concerning. Yes, which is concerning. And I mean, America won't send its entire stockpile. And the problem is that production capacity cannot increase that fast. There's only a handful of companies that provide this type of ammunition. And while America might be sending 200, maybe 250,000 rounds every month, in and maybe some months they don't. I mean, now in the recent package they announced 10,000 rounds, which is concerning. But basically, their procurement has been very low, only around 100,000 rounds a year. So production, even if it doubled right now, and even if we account for future production, uh, America will start running out of artillery shells to send to Ukraine by next year. So that is a consideration that needs to be made, that America might have to start mobilizing its industrial sector to start producing these shells in higher numbers, and even subsidize other countries to do so. I mean, the US has also been paying other countries that have 155 millimeter production to send shells to Ukraine. I think they paid South Africa, they paid South Korea as well.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, this is that quantity is a quality of its own problem, I think.
Yeah. It is a big problem, unfortunately.
It would be
And
so much if we could just give yeah, here's like 1 million,
yeah,
like not advanced, but like high quality rounds, Um because
yeah,
we have the
unfortunately.
money. Yeah, like we can
Oh, the
produce.
money, yes.
Yeah. Like we have money in spades. It's just there's a limit to how quickly this stuff can be produced. I think like American munitions, like there are certain types of American munitions that are literally made in one part of America. There's like one storage facility. I forget what
Yep.
it's called, but there's literally one physical place on Earth where we produce certain types of munitions, and that's it. We don't like expand our production capacity beyond that for some reason.
I mean, the main reason is because anything you spend on the military is essentially a loss. If you're not going to fight a big war, if you're just building up a military or producing stuff that essentially won't be used, and artillery shells do have a shelf life. I mean, the US wasn't expecting to be fighting an artillery war anytime soon, and they still had pretty impressive stocks. On the other side, the Russians always expected to be fighting an artillery war, and a lot of people have been speculating on how many shells the Russians have. I just assume they have, like, I don't know, infinite artillery money glitch. Like, they don't seem to end.
They
They
just
have,
have
yeah.
some factories out in Siberia full of like 87-year-olds who never heard that the Soviet Union fell, and they're still producing Cold War munitions because they don't want to be shot by a commissar, There's just every once in a while a Russian Federation guy with a fleet of trucks picks up their shells and leaves and doesn't tell them. And it's just been going on like that since the 90s.
Nobody has informed them. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, even production capacity, the Russians can produce maybe like 1.5 million, 2 million shells a year, which is just probably covers a lot of their needs. They have this year they fired something like 4 or 5 million shells. So it doesn't cover it fully, but they also probably had maybe 10 or 15 million shells on the side. So the Russians are unlikely to run out of ammunition. They'll probably be cutting down on their artillery fire missions, but they've already done that because of HIMARS and the trouble with concentrating ammunition. Yeah. So, all right. Do you want me to talk about a bit about the media diet advice?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So as I put here on the screen, avoid social media sources for 2 days every time a big event happens.
No.
This is crucial. Please, every time there is a big event that happens, I know you say no, but every time, every single time, I'm driven up the wall by an insane rumor mill. Essentially, somebody will start saying something. Ukrainian Telegram will pick up on it. Then Russian Doomer Telegram will pick up on the Ukrainian Telegram and start reporting it. And then the Ukrainian Telegram will start saying, oh shit, the Russians are reporting that the Ukrainians are there. And then news media will pick it up. And then we get insane stories. In September, when I got news that apparently the Ukrainians had reached Severodonetsk, which just never happened, and Lysychansk, and I had to argue with people that looked at me straight in the eyes and just gave me a bunch of sources that had recycled themselves a bunch of times. Uh, so now you might not always know, how do we know that that sources are reliable? First of all, we can pick and choose better sources, but also I implore people to use their intuition. It's harder to know if you don't know much about military stuff. But say about the evacuation of Kherson. So if somebody says that all 20,000 Russians have been captured and there's thousands of tanks destroyed in Kherson, okay, let's wait for some pictures, right? That's a logical response to have. Let's wait for some pictures. If it is correct, there's probably going to be some pictures of POWs moving, of equipment being captured. So because there wasn't, it probably makes more sense that they withdrew successfully. And in terms of here, I mentioned a bit earlier the idea of a crossing. So here's the deal. If you're going to cross the Dnieper, one of the widest rivers you could possibly cross, you have the area around Kherson, which it is possible to cross there because the flow is way less, even still way bigger than the Siversky Donets that was such a problem in the earlier months. And there are a few crossing spots, but the Russians were when this report of a large crossing happened, the Russians were still in Kherson. They were just withdrawing from all the surrounding areas, and they were around the crossings. So if the area around Kherson, which is most viable to do a crossing, is out of the question, well, what else is left? Uh, where will you make a crossing? The only other spot that a crossing makes sense is around here, which is the only other space where a crossing could be made. Here, why would you even make a crossing? You already have the land right here. So why does it not make sense for the Ukrainians to do a crossing here? Well, the river here is extremely wide, and there is literally nothing to capture. Okay, I mean, let's say the Ukrainians cross here. They don't have vehicles because they can't move them. They don't have barges anymore here, uh, and they can't really move tanks in. And essentially, they have moved in light infantry, and now they're waiting in essentially open ground for the Russians to amass the mechanized forces that they just moved out of Kherson to just turn around and smash them. There isn't even a nice strategic position to capture here. For what? There is like a 50-kilometer radius in this area. Yeah, some insane, maybe 50 to 70 kilometers depth where there's literally nothing to capture. So even if the Ukrainian Marines had made a crossing there, it just makes no sense. There's literally nothing to capture here, and Energodar is defended. So when you have light infantry, you can't very easily cover ground or capture fortified positions. You need heavy weapon support. So when people said that, this crossing happened, it didn't make sense for those reasons. And it also didn't make sense because the Ukrainians would face the exact same problems the Russians did, just with no ability to resupply themselves on this side of the river. So why would they even do it? So sometimes we need to consider where the source comes from, and some other times we need to consider, okay, does what they describe even make sense? And does it make sense is a question that is usually better argued, better answered by analysts. So here's what I will say. I will tell you to avoid a few people, and I will also recommend a few other people. So, couple of people to avoid: Chuck Pfeffer and Trent Telenko. So the main problem of Trent Telenko is the fact that he made a couple of he had some successful threads in the beginning of the war talking about tires, but it very quickly became evident that once he got a huge following as a former Department of Defense civil servant and probably like a very big military nerd, he started talking about things that were completely out of his wheelhouse, and he made a very, very classic error, which is one of extrapolation. So essentially, he used one or two pictures to extrapolate to a huge extent a picture of the Russian army that wasn't necessarily clear or made sense. I mean, at some point, he claimed, I mean, he even took the 85,000 like casualty, 85,000 killed in action that the Ukrainians are reporting. He took that at like face value for the Russian army, which doesn't make sense like logistically. It's too many.
What
Uh,
about
in ter-
what about
Mhm.
Michael Tracy, the guy who went to Poland and said, "Hey, something suspicious here. There's an American soldier in Poland," and then took a photo of a Polish soldier at a Polish army base, and he was like, "Hey, this American soldier," points at Polish soldier, "won't let me
Yeah.
onto this military base. Must be something weird going on here, right?" then I think he saw one truck and got upset. I don't know. So is that
Open,
okay?
open source intelligence. What can you say, right? So many people suddenly say, "I'm open source intelligence," and they just steal a bunch of posts from other people and just plaster them all over the internet without giving credit, and often just perpetuate a bunch of rumors. It's just
Yeah,
yeah,
it's kind of wild how everyone's like mental image of independent journalism is like a bunch of heroic daring truth finders, and in reality it's just a bunch of guys with Patreons who appeal to the most lucrative demographics online, which are always the craziest because they're the ones who are willing to pay for investigative journalism. Because as it turns out, normal people will never pay for investigative journalism. So you're just getting a bunch of cranks running around spreading misinformation
yep,
deliberately because it gets them money. It's great. I love
yep.
it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with independent analysts here. There's gonna
Yeah.
be like two or three absolute gems, and and 40 dipshits that have huge accounts or that had some relation with the military in their past lives. I mean, hell, Chuck Pfeffer is talking about large-scale military operations as an authority, but he was just a former like a squadron leader for like Navy SEALs. Okay, sure, man, you were in the military, but doesn't mean that that necessarily applies to what you're talking about. Like you could have been, I don't know, like a former Department of Defense civil servant. Doesn't necessarily mean that you are an authority on what you're talking about. I mean, I'm talking about all these things, but I don't claim to be like an authority per se. It's just that it's stuff that interests me on one
I do.
end, and on the other, it's just that I have formal education in military history, so there is that aspect.
The moment I
But
woke
I
up the
yeah.
other day, I was calling for Poland to invoke Article 5 um, for the missiles that hit it, that ended up being missiles from Ukraine. And I still
Yeah.
stand by that. I still want them to invoke Article 5. Absolutely. Go
Oh my
for it.
God. Yeah, the whole Article 5 stuff, it was interesting. I mean, if there is even like plausible deniability, it's unlikely that any country will actually invoke Article 5. And the reason for that is you need to have consent essentially from the other from the other members of NATO, and you can't respond over a essentially a nothing burger. Because if you respond over a nothing burger, you could end up splitting the alliance,
Yeah,
and you don't want that.
I
Yeah,
like making jokes about the Article 5 Poland's going to lose it stuff because it's very funny. But I do hope that everyone listening realizes that the Polish government is fully aware that bordering Ukraine during a total war between it and Russia, especially given Russia's reputation for being like really inaccurate and like lacking in caution with their military behavior, Poland is fully aware of the fact that they're probably going to catch some like adjacent flack. And they have already talked about it. This isn't being responded to with any like panicked red buttons being slammed in any headquarters. They know this
yeah.
is going to happen. They're all fully aware. It would take some really insanely serious shit to invoke Article 5, like an actual committed military invasion or troops over the line or like
Or an attack, or
or,
like a major directed
like
attack. I
like an
mean,
actual attack, like a bombing run or something like
yeah.
that. But incidental collateral is not going to yeah, no.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. And I mean, it's not as if the Polish government is like very apprehensive. If something does happen, if military facilities are struck, the Polish will most definitely respond. These guys have been looking forward to fighting Russia for a long
Their
time.
military guys are all just groping their erections every time they woke up to a headline of like a missile falling over the border.
Yeah.
Not the first
Yeah,
time it's
yeah.
happened, by the way. There are tons of missiles have fallen over into the Polish territory. We only heard about the last one because it killed people. Most of the time, it just hits a field or a tree or something.
Probably some stray stuff has fallen here and there. I mean, it's very possible, but
Oh,
it's
it's
not
just
like yeah.
yeah, it's war.
Poland won't respond over, oh, this rocket fell like 1 meter over the border, hit just the mud. Let's go, World War right now. Woo! Like, no, that's not gonna happen. So if anybody is like worried about nuclear war, sure, it's scary, but it's not there yet. Now, Chuck, my problem with Chuck is that he just believes pretty much every conspiracy theory that comes out, um, just every single one. like apparently he has been insisting to everybody that Ukraine has ATACMS, which is a 300-kilometer missile, which is a sort of SRBM. They don't have it, and Chuck has been insisting that they do, and he's been insisting that the truck bomb that hit the bridge in Crimea, he insisted that that was ATACMS with no evidence. So I don't like him. Also, his warnings and indicators stuff that he posts are they look like Department of Defense PowerPoints. Have you ever seen a Department of Defense PowerPoint?
Well, they look like shit. Um,
Yeah.
they're
The
it's all military guys, so they're just they don't know any it's all graphic design is my passion, guys. How do I cram more information than any human has any right to know into a single image?
Yeah, see, perfectly clear. Um,
It,
perfect.
they're incredibly funny.
They're impossible to read. I don't get whatever. It's just another funny side fascination there. So who would I suggest? People. So first of all, Osint East. Osint East isn't a huge analyst, but what he does very often is he debunks misinformation. So if there is a major event happening, I would recommend following Osint East and checking if he has corrected a very big rumor. So I would highly suggest Osint East. Then Defmon. So Defmon is kind of racist, but for the most part, he does perfectly fine analysis. So
I like that. Just okay, heads up, all right. This guy super racist. However,
I mean, he's the good old boy. He's an American like good old boy. And anywho, like yeah, he's the like daily briefs are pretty accurate as to what is happening on the front. So I can't knock him for that. Will I knock him for being a bit racist? Sure, yeah, he's kind of racist.
so he's like the modern like 1960s like military OPSEC guy who has very strong opinions on like missile placements in Europe near the Mediterranean. But also thinks that like MLK is going too far, like that kind of guy.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, he doesn't describe the Chechen soldiers in the best of ways.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
the hordes, the primitive
this
Chechens. Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
exactly. All right. So then Michael Kaufman. Michael Kaufman is a Russian, like he's an analyst that has focused basically his entire career on analysis of the Russian military and what it is like. And he gives perhaps my favorite and most measured responses to what goes on. His analysis is excellent, so I highly suggest Michael Kaufman. Just to get general information analysis on what goes on. Conrad also had Conrad he from Rohan Consulting is also a great resource. I would highly recommend following. Again, for analysis, measured takes. I really like Conrad, and he doesn't post whatever bullshit shows up. Um, Now, couple of people that are personal recommendations and friends of mine. Comrade 161, and this guy I would highly recommend as well to you, Vosh, in case you want to
Hmm.
talk to somebody about Middle Eastern like conflicts. I mean, we talked about Iran recently and what the protests were like there. Iraq, like Kurdistan, Rojava, like I mean, he warned me like a month or two before the Turks decided to invade Rojava again. I mean, the Turks are going to invade again. I think last time I said that they might do that, but they're probably gonna. They have basically declared their intention to invade Rojava again. And yeah, Comrade has also spoken with Merrick a few times. Merrick DeVille.
Yeah, no, oh yeah, of
Yeah,
course. Merrick is my friend and also was in chat earlier. I get it's
yeah.
I'm sad about the Rojava thing. The only reason I've been keeping up with the Ukraine thing as much as I have is because Ukraine has the potential to win, and I think will win. Um, Rojava can't win against Turkey. The most Rojava can really do is kind of like lean back into like lawless Syrian territory further and further to the point where like Turkey doesn't think it's worth it to keep shelling them. Um,
what they can do is fight an insurgency, essentially bleed them
Yeah.
dry, as the Kurds are doing and the PKK is doing. But yeah, if they want a essentially to maintain a state of their own with a military and borders against Turkey, no, they won't be able
Okay.
to manage
So
that.
I want to be clear to someone in chat, because chat just said this, okay? We did a fundraising stream before for Ukraine. That was fundraising medical supplies for refugees. A fundraising stream for Rojava would be, without exaggeration, fundraising funds to give to a recognized terrorist group warring against a NATO ally. That would go down very differently with the people who look over my taxes. Just like to explain the difference between, you know,
It would
um,
not be easy to fund Rojava
yeah,
or like the PKK or anything like that. But the PKK is basically recognized as a like terrorist organization, but by like a lot of people, specifically because of Turkish initiatives.
by a lot
But
of cucks. No, the
yeah,
Kurds have a very legitimate claim towards autonomy and
yeah.
independence. They're
So
treated
I
like shit
highly
in every country nearby.
Exactly. So if you're interested in talking about anything regarding this stuff, I highly suggest following Comrade. He's an excellent resource. He's a veteran of the war in Syria as well.
On which
He has
side?
done training there. He worked with Rojava. He's British.
Oh,
He's really cool.
no, I mean, is
Um,
he was he like a foreign legionnaire, or was he like with the British military there as a British soldier
if I
alongside?
remember correctly, he trained soldiers in Rojava.
That's so fucking dope. I'm glad
Yeah.
ISIS was bad enough that it very briefly led to NATO soldiers training alongside anarchist insurgent groups. That was pretty cool for the brief
No,
while.
it's basically the ISIS somehow managed to basically turn everyone against them. Everyone was fighting on the same side against ISIS. Well, everyone, whatever. I won't get into that. It's a big, complicated story. And then another person that I would recommend personally, if you follow Spawn of Khan, I I know him as James Griffin most of the time. He changed his name recently to Thukidi the Strap Lord, which is interesting. He's also a strategist, and he also comments on a lot of strategy stuff. Uh, and he's former military, and you can see the ramblings that we have on Twitter, discussions between him, me, and a couple of other people like Nikopol and Sasha Toborov. Anyway, I would recommend following him because he's pretty funny, and his analysis is pretty nice, and I often agree with. That's it. Here is my stuff. Twitch.tv/Richie
Fuck,
Hannay is
dude,
my Twitch channel.
that was clean. That was exactly 1 hour. Did you have that time? Do you have a timer?
Well, no, I wasn't paying attention to the time, but yeah, you're right. It is exactly 1 hour. Uh, and yeah, my Twitter is Richard Hannay 17. I mean, I banked this presentation together pretty quickly. I didn't expect to be presenting. It's like 5 a.m. here. Well, no, almost 6 a.m. here.
Oh, Jesus. I
Um,
didn't mean to keep you up that late.
Oh no, don't worry. I was already up because of assignments because I am terrible at time management.
Me too.
Um,
I'm sorry it took me so long to be able to
yeah,
have you on. You know,
it's-
we're not doing as poorly as Ukraine right now, but I'm sure you're aware that America is currently going through it, um,
oh yeah,
in a lot of
oh
ways.
yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely kind of fucked up my schedule a bit in terms of having people on.
No, the stuff in the U.S. kind of concerns me. I think a
Yeah,
lot of people don't really fully grasp just how like dangerous the situation is. I mean, I think it's kind of the privilege of living in a relatively stable country with not as much political violence as other people are used to. Um, yeah, no, the way the Republicans are basically ignoring democracy and calling for the death of minorities and trans people, that stuff is very dangerous. And if people think that, oh, whatever, it can't happen here, sure it can. Sure, I mean the U.S. has very strong institutions, and they have an inertia to an extent, but institutions can be eroded. And if the Republicans capture all aspects of the government, if they have the Supreme Court, right? If they get the Senate, the presidency, and the House, what's stopping them apart from their own political will?
Yeah.
Well, literally nothing. They can change so much stuff that can essentially bend American democracy irreparably. I mean, American democracy, for the sake of balance, or for whatever that's worth, is already pretty significantly bent, right? Considering that the Republicans are basically outnumbered, the Democrats are winning the popular vote pretty much every single time, right? Am I mistaken in thinking
Yeah,
that?
yes. In sheer numerical turnout, Democrats would definitely fairly control the federal government
It
pretty much every time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the reason for that has to do with the electoral college and stuff like that. It's, I mean, I consider it to be very, very weird and pointless. But yeah, I won't discuss American democracy that much, but it is very, very scary. And from my perspective, we saw the rise of Golden Dawn here in Greece. I mean, we discussed that, the rise and fall
Yeah,
of
that
the
was our
Golden Dawn.
first convo. That was also,
Yeah,
by the way, the first foreign policy um discussion that I ever had with another person that broke
yeah.
100K views on the main channel. People really liked that
Oh,
video. It's
that's wonderful.
it's tough talking about foreign policy stuff most of the time. Also, a lot of Americans just don't really know about Greece outside of the financial crisis. So I was very surprised to see how well that did. But no, yeah, it's kind of funny. Pretty soon, like Greece is going to be, I think, perhaps more democratic than the United States. For however long a time, I'm not sure, because if the US ever goes anti-democratic, like we're probably going to drag the world with us, unfortunately, because
Oh yeah, if
yeah,
see that's the thing. Like a lot of eggs are in the U.S. basket, um, and that is pretty scary. And another thing that I like to say when people ask me, "Oh, why do you pay attention so much to U.S. politics?" Well, when America catches a cold, the world basically when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. When America catches a cold, the world is dead. Like there are so many problems that are immediately downstream of American policy. I mean, hell, the 2008 financial crisis in the US, which is a thing of the past in the US, is still affecting countries like Greece and Spain. So when you consider that, any big shift in the US is terrifying. And
yeah,
the chances of you guys falling into like essentially an era of political violence worse than say before the I would say before the Civil Rights Act. That is really really scary. What did I want? I
yeah.
want to.
Sorry for
Yeah.
using the CIA to fund a bunch of former Nazi collaborator far right dudes in your country that we told to lay low in case communism won, so they could be insurgents. But then communism didn't win, so they just went crazy and killed a bunch of people and then entered government. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
That was pretty bad of us.
well, the Clinton, I think Bill Clinton had Bill Clinton had apologized for the U.S. funding the Greek military dictatorship. And I mean
Yeah.
that's the thing, right? Even though like the Greek military dictatorship being funded by the United States because it was an anti-communist regime, that is like a blip in US history, like something that almost nobody knows or cares about. And it has basically made Greece, like in the Greek left, permanently anti-NATO and US. Basically, it has completely broken the Greek left's like it makes it so much more difficult to talk about foreign policy with Greek leftists because part of the Greek leftist legacy is just like opposing the US and NATO and the funding of the military regime.
Yeah,
Um,
we did that a lot of places actually. We never the CIA never found a military dictatorship that they didn't like, as long as they were anti-communist. That was pretty much
something
our go-to.
something you might be interested in. The Golden Dawn is being retried. They appealed their case, so there's going to be another multi-year trial.
Even
And
then, they're fucked anyway, right? Like
oh yeah, they're fucked.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Some of their political party is basically destroyed, and I mean there are still, I think the one guy is running from prison, and he's polling at like 2 point something percent. It was the guy who quoted the protocols of the elders of Zion in parliament. uh Yeah, he has like Nazi tattoos and everything, and he pretends to be the Greeks for the Fatherland, I think, party. That's what
Greek's
he calls
strongest Vaushite.
it. Yeah, it's really funny because the acronym in Greek kind of it could also be read as Greeks I don't know, Greeks for the dick. Yeah, but it's like Greeks suck essentially, which is really funny because that's that's how everybody reads the acronym. So I hope he never ever gets even close to Parliament again. I hope he stays in prison, and I hope that all the rotten Nazis that almost destroyed our democracy last time stay the fuck away.
Well,
Yeah,
I just hope
that's
America
fine.
doesn't go fascist and then support a new, fresh wave of Nazis in Greece. You know, um,
No, please, guys,
I mean,
please, please,
the
please.
Republican Party is already like stroke off buds with fucking Hungary's guy. How am I forgetting the name right now?
Fun.
Yeah, Orban. So you know, after if the fascists win here, they probably will like support Orban from afar, and they might do the same with like Le Pen, or you know any other
Or
fucking
whatever crypto fash party or
or
openly
open
fash.
fat. Yeah, yeah, or full out. You know, I mean, who fucking knows these days? Tucker Carlson had a neo-Nazi on the other day. Kanye is with Nick Fuentes running for president.
Yeah. I saw that the whole situation with Kanye is pretty, I don't know, pretty insane. The man is clearly like he's mentally ill, and he is probably, didn't he say that he's not taking his medication on purpose? Uh, I don't know.
No,
Maybe
yeah,
I'm
he
mis
hasn't since
oh,
2018, I think. And he said
oh
that
Christ.
his doctor was Jewish. He's like avoiding the
Oh,
yeah, yeah, because his Jew doctor wanted to like
well,
keep him down with the antipsychotics.
he won't become president, but some stuff, I think, I don't know what political impact that would have in the US elections. Would it be like would he siphon off
Well,
Republican or
the
Democrat
main
votes?
he wouldn't make it to the final like bits, which means that he wouldn't siphon votes off of Republicans. The real concern is that he would move independent, mostly black people, further to the right because he would invariably end up palling around with the far right, as he has been after he drops out of the presidential race. And he also gives like a giant platform on a national stage, potentially to people like Milo Yiannopoulos and Nick Fuentes. I mean, you don't want to be in like in America where there are three political candidates where you have like a Democratic moderate, Ron DeSantis, who's friends with Nazis, and then Kanye, a guy working with Nazis, who's openly espousing Nazi talking points, who will then go on to probably implicitly endorse Ron DeSantis after he drops out. It's not good. Seems bad
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
No, and that's the, I mean, the main frustration I have is that I talk to some people that, you know, they see a victory like the Democratic victory in the midterms, which is something, you know, worth celebrating. And then they say like, woohoo, like crisis averted. And then I think that, oh Christ, like the Democrats need to keep winning, and they're winning by the skin of their teeth against people who are pretty much dedicated like to destroying US democracy. So people should not be celebrating. People should be, I don't know, a little bit panicked. Like things aren't good.
All right,
Okay,
Bucko. All
I'm
right,
not doing, I'm
Bucko.
not doing, I'm not doing, I'm not doing. Guys, keep voting, please. No, it's really, you must keep voting. I insist that you must keep voting because we might also die. You might take us with you. So
Oh, we'll take you all
go
with us.
go vote. Christ.
And
All right.
nothing else.
And nothing else.
I really do appreciate you coming on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And you know, anytime you want to talk shop on what's going on in Ukraine, I am happy to oblige. And yeah, you guys should go follow me on Twitter and on Twitch if Twitter exists. In a few days, that'll be. If it doesn't die, maybe I'll make a Discord server or something. So you can keep looking at my beautiful face. Anyway, see ya.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Hopefully the next time we talk there's some good news.
Yeah, of course. Let's hope. Let's hope.
Take care.
All right. Bye bye.
I like Richard a lot. Um I didn't talk much at the beginning because he had a presentation. I fully trust him. He presented, can't engage much there. Did later. That is the plan.